question was, what are we doing to make the project sustainable and environmentally friendly? So there's a couple things. First of all, there's the technology itself. The technology uses a very minimal amount of electricity because the electricity is primarily engaged in tracking the sun. So it's a very small movement, and it's not actually powering the light. Of course, the sun does go away from time to time, all right? There's cloudy days and there's nighttime, so you can rest assured that the sun will go away. This device does not save sunlight. That's pretty much impossible to do. You take sunlight, you convert it to electricity, and then you convert it into a chemical. That's how you save sunlight, right? And then you convert it back. This is really much simpler than that. This is effectively a giant periscope meets a casting range telescope, if anyone knows what that is. And so what that means is that it's a simple optical device, and the light comes in and the light goes out. So because of that, we do need to obviously supplement that light with artificial light at night or at any time, like right now, for example. If I was giving this talk in the low line, we'd need to turn on the lights. That's one aspect, right? The other aspect is temperature control. Well, one of several. Now, because it's an underground space, it's a natural heat sink, and that's important. I think we typically view our subways as being incredibly hot and uncomfortable, for a very specific reason, and that is, you know what? There's trains in there, and those trains have brakes, right? They're converting movement into friction. They have air conditioning that basically it's a heat exchange, it's blowing out hot air, and because of that, it makes our platforms oftentimes unbearably hot. But the reality is, if you take an underground space, like let's say you were in a champagne cave in France, right? I don't know why I used that for an example. Let's just say you were in a cave. For anyone here who's been to a cave, it's always pretty uniform 60-some odd degrees, right? Obviously, having people in there increases the humidity, increases the temperature, but by and large, having that sort of surround of being underground is actually hugely significant in your climate control. And so, by means of simple exchanges of air, our need to actually condition the space would actually be pretty minimal. So that's by far sort of what our biggest expense would be. And so beyond that, we would also like to collect rainwater and use that for irrigation to actually water the plants in space. So, anyone else? Yeah. Well, that depends, right? There's several means by which we can irrigate light down into the space. For any means that involves a fiber cable, we would typically want to filter out the UV. And the reason for that is that it will have a tendency to degrade the fiber cables. And so if there's any instance where we're passing it through glass, it's probably going to take out most of the UV.
You said that pieces were achieved individually with that, really increasing costs as well as that.
Well, I mean, this is a one-off solution that we used our Kickstarter funds to fund, right? Now, the way that we did this was that we purchased very large sheets of anodized aluminum, right? Each one of those we had cataloged, right? And so we had basically a CAD drawing with every single piece laid out on each of the sheets in a virtual sense, right? And so to us, it was only really the added labor of having had to catalog all this stuff in the first place. Because once you throw it in there, the cutting time on the machine is the same, right? So the laser just goes around, cuts all these things out, right? And so it was more of a pain in the ass, but it was not more money.
I was just wondering what some challenges. Obviously, I mean, you did the Kickstarter for this session, this project, release, whatever. But as you move forward with your project, what are some of the anticipated concerns as far as investors, or how are you really looking at like tackling this problem, actually implementing this thing?
Yeah.
Or are you looking at getting funding?
So the question was, what hurdles do we see moving forward as to actually getting this thing done? Where are we looking for funding? How do we actually plan on executing a project like this, right? And I guess the first thing to say is that, yes, this is an incredibly ambitious thing to do. No one's ever done it before. It doesn't exist in this world yet. So it's all kind of new, uncharted territory, right? At the same time, I think one very important precedent is to highlight, Highline basically wrote the book on, the guidebook really, on how you can actually begin to take a private entity and use it to create a public space. So what the Highline did, well, they got a lot of money from the city, which we're not expecting because times were flush back when they started, right? However, what they did was they started a 501c3 organization. That's a not-for-profit organization. And they used it as a fundraising vehicle and attracted some very heavy hitters to that group that actually ended up funding the project, right? Now, not to be too sort of overt about comparing ourselves to the Highline, like the name is similar, but it's a very different project. We are almost an order of magnitude less expensive to build than the Highline is. It's much smaller actually of a project. But what we did sort of take from them is the idea that we can create a not-for-profit organization, which we've done, and use that to solicit funds. I think the Kickstarter thing is really kind of a technology that's in its infancy, and certainly it's one we'd like to continue exploring. The idea of crowdsourcing represents sort of a new way of thinking about capital construction that's possibly paradigm shifting, right? Because once you can crowdsource something like a public works project, essentially, you can remove the developer, you can remove the client, and all of a sudden you have the democratization of construction, right? And so, a community can judge for themselves by voting with money what they want as a community amenity for themselves. I think that's an incredibly powerful idea. I don't think the technology or the reach of that technology is there yet. I think that hopefully someday that is something that ends up coming to fruition because, I mean, wouldn't that be amazing if everyone in this room gave, $10 and all of a sudden we had, not in this room, all right, but say everyone on the Upper West Side gave $10 and boom, there's a new park, right? That would be kind of an amazing concept. We can't completely rely on that stuff, and so we actually would like to use that as a tool, of course, but also rely on some more traditional fundraising methods. Yep.
How efficient is your light transfer process? Is there any light loss?
There's a ton of light loss, yeah, absolutely. But, light is all relative. On a bright, sunny day, there's just an incredible amount of light coming out of the sun. And we're going to lose, 60, 70% of it, right? But that's okay. This room is, at least 2 orders of magnitude less bright than the sun is, right? So our perception of light is all relative to sort of what the surroundings are. Our eyes adjust to suit, right? So even if we cannot attain, and we never will, the brightness of the sun, of direct sunlight outside, and we never, that's something we can do. This is just blanket statement, not attainable, right? It will still feel bright. Like for example, our exhibition, we piped in a very specific amount of light, and you know what? It felt pretty bright in there, and so we have to sort of think about this in 2 respects, right? On the one hand, we have our perception of brightness, which is relative, but of course we also have the plantings themselves. And so that's why we began to look at some of these other ecosystems, like the forest floor, for example, right? The Highline is basically the plantings of a sand dune, just up there, right? And it's something that requires direct light. Where the Highline is a sand dune, we're a forest, right? And so, I think it's important to think about it in that way. We have a couple, but the technology certainly continues evolving. Actually, this is cool. The other day I actually came across, I'll get to everyone, sorry. The other day I actually came across an old patent from the 1880s. And it was like this sort of steampunk version of this where they had these copper pipes that were channeling sunlight through a building. It was stunning. They had this incredibly complicated diagram for how it worked, and it looked like, the sort of new Sherlock Holmes movies. All right. Yes?
You mentioned the exhibition, and I was wondering, how is you guys generating the activities involved, how they'll, have you budget those into?
Yeah, I mean, it's hugely, the question was, okay, I mentioned the exhibition, but what other methods are we going to use to get the community involved? And, I think that it will just be a continued sustained outreach. Obviously, it's of paramount importance that this, we're proposing something that's a community amenity. The community should want it for us to have to do something like this, right? And so, on the one hand, the community board itself has voted in full resolution of support for this idea. The local business improvement district also fully supported. The local council members are all fully supporting. And we've attained support at almost every level of the government. And now, this would not have been something we could have done without having sort of very widespread grassroots support for the project. So that community outreach is something that we spent a lot of time doing, and something that we just continue with. The exhibition itself was just sort of the most high-profile and ambitious example of it.
Would your solar arrays interfere with the street traffic above the highway?
The question was, will the solar arrays interfere with street traffic above? And the answer is this. By using systems that redirect the light and concentrate it, what we're able to do is reduce the footprint of these devices at the street level. So what you can envision as a takeaway is like something that operates a little more something like a street, right? So you have a collector array way above the street level, so it's not going to interfere with the sort of pedestrian traffic or bike traffic or automobile traffic. And by the time it is actually at the street level, it's actually narrowed to a much smaller diameter, smaller footprint before it goes into space.
What do you think the topographical ramifications of putting public spaces like this underground are, or being able to?
What's that? The what?
What do you think the topographical ramifications of being able to put public green spaces underground like this are?
I mean, yeah, so I guess everyone heard him. He actually spoke up a little bit. But what are the topographical implications? You can actually envision some sort of horrible dystopian scenario where this is like a model and basically developers gobble up all of our outdoor land, put like giant towers on like every piece of open space and drive all of the public space underground. This is sort of in a horrible distant future. But I think it is important to note that, wait a second, the developers have gobbled up all the above ground space, especially in this neighborhood. And so not to say that like, okay, Lower East Side, you have no space, you guys get an underground park. Sorry, suckers, right? It's more to say that, given the fact that there is very little space remaining, or very little feasible space that we can possibly use as a public amenity, lo and behold, here's this amazing space. Wouldn't it be an amazing experience if we could do this? And now, I think, also to your point, there's another thing to look at here, which is that, well, you have to gather that sunlight. You also have to be able to enter that space, right? And so, a necessary part of this project is not just the underground space itself. Obviously, that's at the core of what we're proposing. But, actually, another almost equally important measure here is that we actually begin to create a scenario where we are now going to have to be almost charged with completely reimagining the ecosystem of Delancey Street itself, which, by the way, at current time, is not a pleasant place, right? But we can actually use this project underground and use its repercussions to actually shape what's happening above ground and actually to turn it into a pedestrian-friendly area, almost restoring it to that original, let's see if we can get there. Yeah, I mean, almost in a lot of ways, restoring it to its original historical condition. Let's see if I can get there. Yeah, right. I mean, if you look at sort of what Delancey Street once was, it was sort of it was probably not the nicest place, but it was at least a vibrant commercial neighborhood, pedestrian traffic, etc. And even in the 60s, which I don't know, do you think this looks like the 60s or the 70s? Yes, maybe, right? There's bell bottoms. There's like a Chevy Nova in the background, right? Yeah, I mean, but look, compare that to this, right? So imagine, if you will, at the bottom of this image, that we turn all of that traffic island space into public plaza, with a series of, what amounts to street furniture, really, as well as a series of sculptural openings and sort of landmarkish kind of entry points. And you begin to actually create a scenario where the actual plaza level is as much a part of the park as the park itself.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit more on the whole kind of idea of entries and access to the whole, because basically you're redefining how we are accessing green spaces, because usually if the park is overground, we wouldn't have to go down a staircase or...
That's certainly true. I mean, I think, there's a sort of a modernist trope of the sunken plaza, right? And if you look, they have a lot of them in Chicago, right? And they have a few in New York, but like, it's usually some very strange concrete landscape that's been sunken down So I think an important characteristic here is that you need to make it, on the one hand, a cultural destination, right? Program the space so that it actually has stuff going on, and reasons that you would want to go down there, et cetera. On the other hand, I think you have to make the act of going down there, without giving too much away about our current design process, right? But you have to actually make the act of going down there part of the experience itself. So the act of sort of the stairs or whatever, stairs. The act of sort of using those stairs, occupying those stairs, traversing through the stairs is actually almost its own endpoint, its own experience. And by doing that, you can actually sort of compel people to use a space that is not on the ground plane like a traditional space.
You say that your project is different from the highlight, and I definitely agree, but you can't help but compare the two, especially with the name that you chose. But how would you prevent this project from, being like the highlight and that it's turned into kind of a tourist destination? Like I did a project on it in class and I went to a lot that semester. But I have to say, like for the past 2 years, I've gone there like once when my friend came in town. I don't think it's a place that actual New Yorkers use as a public space, unlike Central Park where you will see people running, like Riverside. What are you going to do to prevent the low light from becoming that as well?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. I think anytime you build sort of a high-profile cultural institution or like sort of designy thing, tourists come, and that's very much a reality. I think I don't ever want to sort of cast any aspersions on what the High Line has done. It's one of the most successful public spaces, like really in history, and what they've done is nothing short of spectacular. However, yes, there are concerns that it's kind of, and you'll hear it described it's really two sides of the same coin. You'll hear it described as a tourist trap and also as sort of a gentrifying element in the neighborhood, in the negative way, right? And so that's a very frequent comment that comes up. I think what comes up with this project is that, we have sort of two camps of commentary, one of which is that it's a playground for yuppies, and the other one is it's a playground for rats, right? And so evidently these two groups don't talk to each other before sort of commenting. But, I think that it is certainly a concern. I think I would cite a couple things, right? First of all, actually, without going into the rats, let's talk about the yuppies first. The fact of the matter is that this is not strictly speaking a park space, right? This is half landmark, half cultural institution / performance space or whatever, and half green space, right? And I think that has some implications. On the one hand, it's actually something of an anti-park, right? On a beautiful day, you're probably more likely to go to Central Park than you are to go to this space, right? Why would you want to go underground on a beautiful day? But at the same time, on a not so nice day, or in the middle of winter or whatever, this is actually a very compelling park space to go down into. And I think that simple fact will make it something that is appealing to the neighboring community. Not only that, but the plan is that it actually is actively programmed to engage local businesses and local community organizations to actually come in. Now, that said, I think it would be to a large extent a measure of success if tourists actually come to this thing. The Lower East Side is systematically been neglected for many generations, and I think it would be foolish to sort of insinuate that this was a neighborhood that didn't, they couldn't have a landmark or couldn't have something that the rest of the world truly thought was special. And so, bringing outsiders or tourists down into that space, I don't think is as negative a thing as as a lot of people might suggest.
Can I respond? I'm sorry. Okay, so the Lower East Side, I think that part of what makes it cool is that the landmarks of that neighborhood are sort of hidden. They're sort of like people don't know about them. I think that is part of the appeal. It is like very New Yorker-ish. That like, for example, like the underground City Hall subway station. Like, like if you're not from here, you probably wouldn't know about that. And I think that's why people like it so much. So, you worry about losing that appeal.
I think, that's something I've alluded to, right? Like the fact that, even just the suggestion that there were these secret spaces down there was like, somehow touching on the cultural nerve. And yes, to a large extent, by sort of bringing this to the foreground, you lose the, sort of the obscurity that all this stuff dwells in, you know. But at the same time, you know, this is a method to begin to address a lot of the sort of urban concerns that are actually located right there. And the Lower East Side, you know, it's got the, I guess it's got the new museum. That's almost, like the Lower East Side itself really doesn't have many cultural institutions. What it has is a lot of infrastructure and a lot of bars. And, you know, I think that it, you know, it's such a, it's a historic neighborhood and deserves a little bit more than that.
You mentioned that in your exhibit, you invited vendors to sell coffee and all of these people were lounging around the urban space. Do you foresee inviting vendors in the actual line?
Yeah, I mean, the reason that we invited people in on sort of those Sundays we were open to actually set up stalls and carts or whatever is because it is very much our intention that we would like local vendors or whatever. You know, because the Lower East Side is not full of chain stores. It's got a little tiny, little one-off mom and pop kind of stores, most of which are actually pretty amazing. And so if we can somehow actually begin to pull those people into the space, I think it actually makes it a much cooler place to go. Anyone else?
Who did you actually have to get permission from in order to take over the space? And the second question is what's the timeline for it actually being built?
Okay, so the answer to the first question is that as with most underground spaces, the city technically owns it, but the MTA owns it under their master lease in perpetuity, right? As long as it's used for a transit-related function, which, by the way, we would adhere to. You know, one of the things I did not mention is that we very much would like to link this space to the adjacent subway stations, which is technically feasible, and so it is actually a transportation amenity as well. But anyway, to your point, for all intents and purposes, this is an MTA property. And what was the second question again?
What's the timeline for
We would like to actually do this at break ground in 5 years. The highlight guys took something like 10 years, but you know, I think they paved the way psychologically for a project like this. All right, Joe.
Well, you mentioned talk of it being a performance space and then an artistic space and having a sort of sculptural exhibits. Can you just talk about maybe, you know, artists in the area, artistic communities that have responded to you and talked about the possibilities of using it as an artistic space?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, the Lower East Side is one of the most vibrant gallery scenes in the city, right? And so, you know, I think that this is a kind of a unique opportunity to create a showcase for some of that talent, and whether that's done on a permanent basis or a rotating basis is one of the cornerstones of what we're trying to do is to actually evolve that element of it. So.
How do you plan to transpose real-time weather conditions into the lowland? For instance, wind speed, wind direction, when it's almost twilight. How will someone down there see all those wind-changing scenes? How do you plan to incorporate everything?
The question was, how does the lowland space relate to some of the external conditions above ground? And the simple answer is this. Most of what goes on above ground is not reflected down there, right? It'll never snow in the lowland, it doesn't rain down there, and it's not very windy. Now, the light is going to vary according to the time of day, right? Noon is going to, you know, true noon is going to be the brightest time of day, and rather than that light shifting directionally, though, you'll have a sort of a tapering off of the natural light. And if you're there in a time of year when the heliostats are actually tracking the sun at sunset, yes, the space will turn orange. Yes?
How would you suggest that you get involved in the viral
So the question my girlfriend just asked was, hey James, how can all of us get involved in like a more substantial, what was it, viral way? I don't really know what that means, but. Yeah. Getting students have no money, but you know, students do have a lot of passion, typically. I hope you guys do it, right? And so look, if you quite simply go to our website, which is in the program actually, you can go check it out. You can sign up for for our newsletter or whatever, which actually oftentimes enumerates ways for people to actually come and get involved and get their hands dirty. You know, for this exhibit, For example, we had dozens of people coming in and hauling bags of moss and mulch and actually getting their hands, okay, so she now tells me that it doesn't sound appealing, but I said hands dirty and it made me think that, yes, you can literally get your hands dirty if you should so desire, or you can volunteer in more soft-handed, nerdy ways at a computer if you should so desire. Anyone else? Oh, there's a couple more. Okay, yes. No, that's good.
I read, I guess, what was an earlier interview, where the project had a different name, and the nickname no longer just been deleted. And you said that you were leery of the nickname because you wanted this to be something that was for the Lower East Side. And I was just wondering how and why you decided to go with the name for the Lower East Side.
It's a great question. Our original name was the Delancey Underground, right? And we picked that, although the obvious nickname for this project is the Low Line. We picked that initially because, for reasons that, well, she stated, for example, the High Line carries with it all sorts of connotations, right? It, some people sort of has an embedded meaning having to do with gentrification or, or sort of, super expensive design or Diane von Furstenberg or whatever, right? And, this is a very different project. It uses a piece of remnant infrastructure, yes, to be sure, right? But it is a very different project. And we felt like this was a project that was meant for the Lower East Side for Lower East Siders to be proud of and by people that were, on the Lower East Side, right? And felt like we were maybe shortchanging it and sort of robbing it of a little bit of its specialness by coming up with a name that was so similar to at the end of the day, the tidal wave of sort of media attention or whatever that was using the term the Low Line was so great that we just had to give up resisting. And it has its benefits, certainly it's catchy, right? But at the same time, yeah, we probably lost a little bit of something in terms of distinction in having changed our name. Here's what it is. Yes. It's a good question. I'm a little bit wary of pets because it doesn't rain in the Low Line, right? Unless you can walk your cat or something like that. Now, the sort of programmatic elements that should probably go into a project like this are really kind of dictated by a lot of the existing conditions, right? So on the one hand, we need a large sort of open plaza-ish space in order to actually even have, our Shakespeare in the Low Line or our concert or whatever, like Wu-Tang Clan in the Low Line. And so we need that as an element. We also need, I think it's also very important that we provide vendors, food and beverage, basically, right? And I think the other element that certainly needs to be included in the Low Line is really sort of a manifestation of what I was just talking about this sort of sense of exploration and discovery. I think it needs to be like a journey into really the roots of New York City, right? So you can actually pass through the strata of the city and almost have this archaeological exploration where you actually begin to descend into its bowels, right? And what does that actually translate into? I'm not entirely sure, but I think it should definitely involve an element of actually being able to delve into sort of this cobblestone land or even beyond that into the bedrock of the city and be able to wander around and just sort of explore this sort of urban cave system in a lot of ways, right? And so I think these are all elements that need to be embraced, as well as the sort of the arts component, in order to really make this a successful space. Anyone else? Yes. Good question. We finished our engineering studies very recently, actually, and we were able to actually price out all the shell costs, et cetera, and make allowances for all the costs that we don't know. And our engineers are telling, and our costing experts are telling us that this is a project that ranges between $35 and